Hey guys, before we get started here, I'd like to plug a new channel I'm forming. It's called DL Live. It's going to be a place where I will stream live streams, mostly auto racing related content and a lot of iRacing, video games, things like that. I'll also be doing other sorts of exclusive content there. There's several reasons I'm starting this channel, but the main one is I need a defense against any potential demonetization issues that could happen on my main channel, which is this one. As I found out just a couple of weeks ago, YouTube decided to not pay me for about 38 days. Most likely that had something to do with the political ads that were running on my channel and potential bots that were attempting to interfere in the election. It's unfortunate that that is what's happened to my channel, but I need a defense mechanism for that. So I want everybody to go subscribe over to DL Live, and hopefully I can get to the 1,000 subscriber threshold. I think I'll be able to do that, and then we'll start working on content, get that channel monetized, and then have at least another line of defense against any YouTube shenanigans going forward. And I think I'll be producing some fun content that you guys will enjoy watching. Speaking of, let's get to talking about the things that are making some waves in the world of racing right now. And the headline read, Natalie Decker wins race. Yes, indeed, that is true. Natalie Decker won in the Trans Am race at Circuit of the Americas this weekend. However, it was a class victory. She actually scored 4th overall in the race, and she won the SGT West class driving a GT4 Audi. Now, this is where things kind of go off the rails. Yes, indeed, Natalie Decker was the winner of the SGT West class. However, she was the only driver and car in the class. Therefore, by taking the green flag, essentially, she won the race. However, I suppose a technical knockout is still a knockout, and congratulations to Natalie Decker for winning a one-car race. And we joke, but I will say this, credit where credit's due, she has the trophy, and a lot of the people who are watching this video do not have the trophy. So I will ask the question, who's laughing at the end of the day? Probably Natalie. Now we get to an actual serious story, and one thing that I was fairly well aware of for at least a couple of weeks now, but it's now public information, that Helio Castroneves has signed with Meyer Shank Racing on his second car for next year. Now, Castroneves will not be a full-time driver. It will only be for 6 races in the 2021 season. But Michael Shank has made it very clear that he intends for this car to be a second full-time car on the Meyer Shank team. Now, Helio Castroneves will be participating in races at Barber Motorsports Park, the Acura Grand Prix at Long Beach, the Indianapolis 500. Then we'll take a little bit of a break and then head back at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the NASCAR IndyCar doubleheader, then on to Portland and Laguna Seca to close out the year. Now, the car number will be number 06, and the only reason I bring this up is because it's a bit of a statistical oddity. Indy cars usually don't have zeros in front of their numbers. That was kind of a mid-2000s trend, and it kind of went away. In fact, the last time that anyone ran a 0 in front of their number was, ironically enough, a 06 car. This was James Hinchcliffe driving for Newman Haas Racing in their final season. So a little bit of an interesting note there. Another statistical anomaly here, or at least one that's interesting, is the fact that Helio Castroneves has not driven a Honda-powered car, with an asterisk, in a year that there has been competition between Honda and another brand. Of course, he ran Hondas the entire time where Honda was the sole supplier. But Helio has not driven a Honda car in a competitive environment since 2001 when he was in the kart series. So the fact that Helio, when there has been a choice, usually Penske has gone with Chevrolet or another alternative, and now that Penske's no longer driving, or Helio is no longer driving for Penske, he is now going to be behind the wheel of a Honda. And oh, by the way, I need to remind everyone that while Meyer Shank Racing is certainly not straight up an Andretti car, they do get technical support from Andretti Autosport. So those of you who are hoping to see Helio Castroneves, particularly in the Indianapolis 500, potentially do well, he has got one of the hot ticket combinations that we have seen in previous years. I mean, Alexander Rossi and the like have done such great things with those Andretti Autosport Hondas. You've got to imagine that Helio Castroneves is probably going to get the most out of the car as well. There's also the consideration of the sports car program, and certainly with Helio Castroneves running a partial season in IndyCar, that makes it very easy for him to slot in, even though that wasn't announced today, to the Meyer Shank Racing Acura in the IMSA series. So the IndyCar silly season is definitely coming into a much more focused, clear picture. This was one of the major shoes to drop. I know there were a few other drivers looking at this seat as a potential landing spot. One of those was Oliver Askew. It's interesting that they went with Helio, but I think it makes sense in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people will see this when I explain kind of why they did this, obviously. I think Helio, being a partial season driver, it makes a lot of sense from that perspective. Jack Harvey, I think, is the future of that team, at least if we're talking about long term. So you wouldn't necessarily want to give a 45-year-old guy the lead spot on the team, certainly a full-time effort, and you wouldn't want to hamper Harvey's effort if you wanted to, say, for example, go two full-time cars, or bring in a driver like Oliver Askew, who is less experienced, might not be able to get that second car up to speed as quickly as Helio might be able to. The other advantages with Helio, of course, is that the biggest race, the one that matters the most to sponsors and team owners, Indy 500, you got a 3-time winner there. I'm sure that had a lot of consideration there. I'm sure when you're thinking, who can we win the Indy 500 with, you look at the guy who's won the race. Whether that's the right thought process or whether that's the wrong thought process, certainly from the perspective of hype, I think you're going to have a lot more hype with Helio Castroneves in that car from a sponsor's perspective. The other consideration is the Honda consideration. Certainly Honda has to sign off on drivers jumping into teams that are as closely tied with Honda as Meyer Shank is. And I think certainly the perspective of being able to plug Helio into the sports car, where he has done the lion's share of the development work with Team Penske, him being able to come into that team potentially and help with setup data, even if he's just testing the car, Helio Castroneves is a very resourceful driver, not only on the IndyCar side of things, but also on the sports car side of things. And ironically enough, we're going to be seeing a lot of IMSA prototype and IndyCar crossover next year. As we just talked about in the video before this one, we have Jimmy Johnson running the Rolex. He could run more races. You never know, depending on how his IndyCar schedule goes. There's also Felipe Nasr, who is potentially going to run full-time in both series. That would be nice to see. Sebastian Bourdais, I think, potentially could run IMSA races or continue to run IMSA races. We'll have to see, in addition to his full-time Foyt seat in IndyCar racing. So for whatever reason, it seems like the crossover between sports cars and Indy cars is closer than it's ever been in terms of IMSA and IndyCar racing. The rest of silly season in IndyCar, there's a few seats that are still open, it seems. We are going to talk about that actually in greater depth in a future video. Hopefully I'll have that out by tomorrow. But there are some potential bombshells still to come. Now, I've been told about this Helio thing a little bit early. The only reason I didn't go 100% public with it was because I was a little bit... My source had told me that it was a full-time deal, and it clearly wasn't, and that was kind of the thing that stunk to me, and I couldn't really get anybody to kind of confirm to me whether or not Helio was going to be in that seat to begin with, outside of my primary source, and then the other factor was the fact that I was confused because everything and everybody had been saying was partial season, and this was the first thing that kind of contradicted that. I think it was obvious once what direction they were going once they purchased the Dragon Speed chassis from the currently defunct Dragon Speed IndyCar program, because that seems to be what Shank does when he's about to expand. I know he did that right before he went full-time in IndyCar racing. They purchased an Indy 500 only car for Jack Harvey, and so I think they have 3 or 4 different chassis to choose from now at Meyer Shank Racing. I think it's going to be a very strong program next year. It will depend how much testing Helio gets. You would imagine that they'll probably bring him to spring training, even if they're not bringing him to St. Petersburg, which was kind of a head scratcher in my respect. It's kind of interesting that they're bringing him to Barber rather than bringing him to St. Pete to start the year. But I'm sure they have their reasons. I guess does Honda still sponsor Barber? That might make actually. If it's still the Honda Grand Prix of Alabama, or that might not be the case anymore, but at least at one point Honda sponsored that event. That might be the big red flag right there as to. But then again, they're not going to Mid Ohio, which you would think that would be an obvious if it was Honda pulling the strings about where they're headed. I don't know why they chose Barber. Maybe because Helio's comfortable there. I have no idea, or maybe they just want to focus on Harvey for the first race of the season. Who knows? But let me know what you think down in the comment section below of Helio Castroneves going to Meyer Shank Racing for next year. Also, let me know what you thought of the trolling about Natalie. Natalie Decker did win a race, but the way I presented it, maybe you guys thought it was a little bit different situation than it was. That'll be fun in the comment section below. And seriously, though, go subscribe to DL Live. Again, I need a potential backup plan if something, again, happens to this channel. And clearly, even though I produce very safe content for YouTube, apparently that doesn't matter anymore. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and I will see you in the next video.